Hi everyone, my name is Rebecca. I'm a fish biologist and ichthyologist and also a PhD student. I specialise and study the evolution of loricariids. Catfishes are also known as plecos within the aquarium trade. I'm an aquarist and have been for many years, and I have also worked in the aquarium trade itself, so I've experienced many aspects of it. So when you ask or think about pleco diets, frequently you'll be exposed to the idea of them needing wood, or them needing it for digestion, or actually being able to digest it. And this is based on loads of different myths, and it's quite easy to kind of track as to why. So first I'll introduce plecos or loricariids. Loricariids is a family of catfishes. There's around 1,050 currently described species, many more undescribed. They go under many different common names, from L numbers to whiptail catfish, whiptail plecos, twig catfish, plex in general, bristle noses, also a variety of different, there's so many different common names, and there's many in other languages as well, which is why we use scientific names and to an extent L numbers for this group. But this means that their diets are incredibly diverse. There's carnivores, there's not that many of them, there are quite a few in a way. There's mostly algivores and detritivores, specialising on algae or detritus, which is more usually in the case of bacteria, algae, a sort of matrix of different microbial life. And algivores as well can be quite diverse in what algae they feed on and to what extent they rely on it. Obviously, mentioned carnivores, there's diversity there, some specialising maybe more in mollusks and others a bit more generalist. And then you get sort of different diets, so there's granivores like Lasiancistrus do feed on different seeds potentially. But today I'm going to talk about more partially towards a group of detritivores, but loricariid diets in general. So the myth of plecos, loricariids needing wood for digestion or for eating has really come from the idea that potentially some loricariids, particularly that group Panaque, Panaqolus, and the Hypostomus Cochliodon group, so that's royal plecos, clown plecos, tiger plecos, stuff like that, do actually consume wood. And I have done a whole video about the myth that they are eating or digesting wood, so I recommend watching that for a bit more detail on that group, and also includes many of the different papers. But these fishes were found to have wood in their guts, but also you can see that they're woody debris as released from when they're sort of feeding. So there is two other genera that could be involved. So this is Pseudocolus, which was in Panaqolus, but they actually aren't. And so that's Pseudocolus coco, and also potentially Lasiancistrus heterocanthicus. It's not entirely known about those two species, as there isn't actually any gut analysis records that I can find. It's more sort of hobby or based on morphology. So what makes these genera that actually utilise wood different? Firstly, they have spoon-shaped teeth. So they are, well, like a teaspoon in shape, and that's how they gouge out of the wood. And all of these groups have it, all of these genera have it, but there is a little bit of diversity even within some species, I've noticed, and it probably is to do with how far they can gouge into the wood. They also tend to have really strong jaws, but that's not exclusive to these groups. Many different clades have strong jaws, such as Scoponancistrus and Pseudocanthicus, which are carnivores. Scoponancistrus is actually quite closely related to the Panaqolus, because they're part of the Plecotia group. Scoponancistrus is like sunshine pleco. I don't think there's a common name for the other ones, like L253 I think it is. So these have very specialist morphology to specialise on gouging at that wood. There isn't any other kind of specialist morphology in body shape, I'd say. They're like the clown plex, so part of Panaqolus and Panaque, are quite deep-bodied fish, whereas the others, there is, and I guess the Hypostomus Cochliodon group is equally as quite deep-bodied, and I don't think there's anything behind it. It might just be to do with their habitats. An interesting thing is, particularly Panaque, not all of them are found around wood. They clearly do not rely on wood to survive or anything like that. So that's a big sort of hole in the theory that they do. So they've got a specialist morphology. Other clades do not have these spoon-shaped teeth. Anything that is not consuming wood does not have these specialist teeth. Ancistrus, bristlenoses do not. Panaque, does not. Hyponcistrus does not. What else? Why can I never... Like, Pseudocanthicus does not have these spoon-shaped teeth. It's really exclusive to this dietary niche. But I mentioned that they're not actually digesting or using the wood as digestion. So there's been actually loads of scientific studies on this topic, and my video on Panaques covers quite a few of them. So using feeding dietary studies, these fishes are not able to actually gain any nutrients from the wood. And this is also emphasised in other studies. So when Panaques are exposed to only having wood available to them to feed on, they lose weight. And this is also shown with the common pleco, in this case Plecos disjunctivus, I think it was, it might have been Panaqolus. They can't do it either. They're equally as unable to digest wood, but the Plecos can't even break its teeth into the wood. I guess if the wood's really rotting, it could potentially break it apart quite easy, especially like bogwood. Then there was later studies, so there's ones on the gut biome. They do not have the bacteria in the gut to actually break down wood. Another study, which is a 2012 study, so this shows how far ago we knew they cannot digest wood and do not use it for digestion. So 2012 study, I think it's 2012, might be 2015. So this study used isotopic data and shows that where the wood is not, the lignin, the cellulose, any of that is not actually being taken up by the fish. It's a little bit more complex than how I make it sound, but they can't actually take up the wood at all. It's not contributing to anything in the fish's body, which if you're eating something, it should be picked up in the isotopic data. It should be picked up I'm explaining it really badly, but basically this study shows that they're not taking up any of it. What they are actually feeding on, I'll go on to a bit later. So there's been around 4 or 5 studies in the topic. All of them show that these fish do not digest wood. But what about using it for digestion? Firstly, why do these clades use it for digestion and none of the others? Because only these clades have wood in their gut. None of the others do. And I trawl through so many or Loricariidae diet records, and only these ones ever have woody debris or anything similar recorded in it. So they don't need it for digestion, to be honest. They're not digesting anything that's particularly difficult to digest. They're not eating plant matter, they're not eating invertebrates that need to be ground down. But also remember, a lot of people see fish and they only see these oral jaws and they think they're just going that. Whereas firstly, these fish are rasping, so that's doing a really good job of breaking down a food item, like mortar and pestle in a way. So they're not limited in other manners that other fishes are. Also remember, most fishes have a secondary pair of jaws that will aid in this breaking down of food. So they don't need this second food item. What I do see more frequently actually in Loricariidae diets or in their gut analysis is substrate, but I don't know whether the sand or something actually contributes to much. So it's pretty clear they do not digest wood and they don't use it in digestion. It's more simple to think of it as it just passes in one way, out the other. And people are really passionate about this. So one of the scientists involved in one of the earlier studies, and I think actually is an author on quite a few of the later ones, got a lot of hate for it and wrote a really good article talking about how fish diets, or how many fishes will seem to feed on something but they're not digesting it, using parrotfishes who feed on sponges as an example, but they're not digesting any of the sponge. All they're doing is they're using it as a place to find food, and that's simply what's happening here. Panaques, Panaqolus are looking for food in a place that no other fish can look. They've got the ability to search or exploit a different niche to other fishes, which gives them a competitive advantage. It's not about digestion, like, it's not about them being able to digest something. So what do these groups of fish actually eat? So Panaqolus, Panaque, Royal Pleco, Callahan, Pleco, and also that Hypostomus, Cochliodon group, so stuff like rusty Pleco, they actually are feeding on fungi, bacteria, potentially algae, and that's actually the same sort of diet as most other loricariids. The most common diet is that sort of detritivore, bacteria, algae, microbial diet. They're just feeding on it in a different place. So that's what, but it doesn't make them any less interesting. So most of the studies, there's not actually that many, I don't think there are any fish that can digest wood. But this is interesting because not that they can digest wood, but it shows that loricariids are capable, many are found in the same habitat, and they're feeding maybe on the same thing in a different place. So exploiting something none of the others can exploit. Let's get beyond them actually needing wood or being able to digest wood. That's totally, oh, it's just annoying. But there is a behavioural advantage to giving them wood because it acts as a hiding place. And for this group of fishes, yes, they're not digesting it, but they're naturally grasping on it. So it offers a behavioural benefit, enrichment. Just remember that you're going to be cleaning up a lot after it, but they're not using it for digestion. Do not rely on it for food. These fishes, there's a reason why these fishes don't grow as fast as they're meant to, particularly Panaque. And that's probably because they're not getting the right diet. They're not actually getting a diet. People are relying on wood, which isn't feeding them. And a lot of people say, but my bogwood will be growing this amount. Firstly, I don't think your bogwood is growing that amount of microbes that will sustain such a bit, well, even the small ones, but quite a big fish. They're going to be getting through that amount quite quickly. And the woods that are found in their natural habitats produce a lot more biofilms than what any sort of, especially any of the ornamental woods. Quite a few of them are noticed to be using like palms and stuff, which produce a lot of biofilms. But I find it like, because, well, different woods will produce different biofilms in general. But also you have to remember the amount of, you have to remember the amount of biofilms, the type of biofilms, and also most people aren't feeding like fresh wood or anything like that will produce enough. People don't want to feed fresh wood, anything with bark that could actually, but then they do need their own diet. So I recommend feeding an algae based diet because we don't have anything that's mostly like bacteria based. And then building on it with feeding like mushrooms and like edible mushrooms. Other fungi are a little bit more difficult to, I guess, cater for, but some diets do contain like yeasts and stuff, but then it's going quite broad into fungi. But it's quite obvious that these fishes are not processing wood. If you look at the amount of waste, that's not being processed at all. It's going in one way and coming out the other. And given these fishes aren't growing well in captivity, it's safe to say that most people are not giving them enough food anyway. So a long-winded bit to the main part of the video, I guess. And this is that most loricariids are not capable of digesting wood, of breaking into wood unless it's really decaying, and then they might, and a lot of people confuse like when they're rasping on the surface with them eating it, and people don't do it so much with rocks, but they do it with rocks just as much, and they're probably scraping off a little bit, but they're still not digesting or eating it. It's like, you don't eat cutlery, you just put in your mouth to get food, I guess. So as I mentioned earlier, no other group has wood in their gut in any scientific paper, and there's a lot of groups and a lot of, well, reasonable amount of studies. So they don't need wood, they definitely don't need it in their like captive diet things, but also many are found in the absence of wood. Look at the Rio Xingu. There's literally none of the photos you really see of the main area where most of our fishes come from has wood. And also stuff like the Rio Orinoco. You've got to think about the habitats. These habitats don't actually have that much trees surrounding them, and the wood will be deposited most likely in those smaller streams that are outskirting. So a lot of people say it makes it more natural, but it doesn't unless you're actually replicating the habitat, and I think people are using the word natural quite wrong in many cases. So, and I mentioned that their morphology is completely different. So what are the issues with wood? And a lot of people say it's not actually that bad to be recommending it because it won't kill them if I recommend it. So it is a great hiding place, but so's rocks, so's caves. There's plenty of different hiding places you can provide. Sometimes I find the issue with wood is you got to be careful about the amount of bacteria they produce, and just because loricariids do eat bacteria, they might not eat that bacteria growing on the wood. And I've grown many different bacteria on woods in aquariums, and my loricariids have not touched it. Like all the palms that I had in well, would be Nat Tank actually. They didn't touch any of those biofilms. I never once saw them near the biofilms. The snails did, and similar for like fresh branches, but I like fresh branches because wood's quite expensive and I just know that these are safe species. But you also got to maintain like higher, I think a lot more flow. That bacteria is going to be catching a lot of things. Good water quality, avoiding that detritus that will sort of build up on any of those biofilms. But what is the main issue with this wood argument? So the main thing is it detracts from the actual issue. So when people say, oh, my fish died, and you get a load of replies like, oh, you should have given it wood, that's why it died, and or did you give it wood? What should I feed my fish? Oh, make sure you have wood. There's this constant flow of that they need wood, and it not actually focusing on what actually caused the fish to die, what the fish actually needs in its diet, what the fish actually needs in its tank. And then it takes up so much space in recommendations. So when people do these guides on loricariids, on Plex, they're like, needs wood for digestion. No, they do not. Most of them don't even have it in their diet. Most of them, even if they're eating something quite coarse or difficult to digest, they've got jaws that are really capable of doing it. There's plenty of other mechanisms, and those ones aren't even found around wood more than often anyway. So we've got to think, there's no point being unrealistic and recommending something that's not true just because of the sake that's not that harmful, even though it's not true. And for Panaques and stuff, it's actually a bit of a disaster because it's leading to them being much more stunted, not growing as big as they could do, and even starving to death in the aquarium. So the final thing is wood in aquarium diet. So you'll see many pre-made diets. So this might be a gel diet, might be a pellet, a wafer, anything like that. And it will say plecta with some sort of wood, oak. Oak's the usual one, and I don't know how they could prove it's oak. But most of the time, if you look at the ingredients on the back, it will say cellulose powder. So while bulk wood is not an issue in the gut, neither will be digested, neither are used in digestion, and there's never been any suggestion that cellulose is any benefit for them in general. But the main thing is that these diets aren't actually containing bulk wood, it seems more often. More often they're containing something known as cellulose powder. So cellulose powder is actually quite different from the bulkwood that if you just, I guess, grinded up bulkwood and shoved it in a diet. Cellulose powder is actually connected to liver damage in fishes, and people might say, oh, but these fishes are adapted to having wood in their gut. That's very different because they're not breaking down that wood at all. They're not capable of breaking down the wood to its like pure cellulose level. So this cellulose powder is something that they're not even evolved to have in their gut, but it also is connected with liver damage in fishes and potentially other health issues. So why is it being added? We know that the science has proven that none of these fishes digest wood or use it in digestion for over like 12 years. I think 2009 actually was the first ever paper. So that's what, 15 years we know that these fishes, particularly Panaque, and even Neotropical, the common Pleco, do not digest wood and cannot use wood in digestion. So why is it still being used? I don't know, but people buy it because they're constantly told that these fishes need wood, they digest wood, they need it in digestion. So we need to start looking at ingredients firstly, and the oak one bugs me because when you look at the ingredients, I think it's actually cellulose powder. It's like, how do you track it back to being from, well, Quercus I think is the genus. How do you track it to being Quercus? I don't know, but somehow they're claiming to. And it's in a lot of plec diets these days, so you either get vegetable ones. Vegetables are a little bit more useful, depends on the species, but cellulose wood, no use at all. Why are brands still using it when it actually could have damage to the fish's health in the long term, and not looking at giving loricariids the diets they deserve, because they are not one dietary niche, there's multiple different niches, and there's a lot more diversity than I've just stated here. I've got a website where I've done like, I think 10 or so articles on different diets and loricariids, so not just one thing. But I think that gets me to the end of this. So do you need wood? Add it as a hiding place. Feed your fish. These fishes probably eat constantly in the wild. Some probably actually have higher metabolisms than many think, just because of the temperature. And you can tell they're constantly eating in the wild because they're constantly grazing. Or maybe they might be constantly searching for invertebrates if they're carnivores, or constantly going through the substrate, constantly going through the surface, looking for what they're feeding on. There's multiple different dietary niches. I just mostly focus on mentioning detritivorous and alcivores because they're what I like. They're the majority of taxa. There's a lot more diversity than they get credit for in like their diets, but there's a lot more, and should be a lot more focus on the diversity of diets beyond omnivore. I hate the word omnivore because it's really undescript. There's not many that are actually omnivores. Because if you're just, otherwise everything's an omnivore. If you're just going to say, oh, because they eat something that photosynthesizes, because algae aren't really plants. Oh, and they eat something that's an animal. It's really vague. And then where do you place things that specialise in like protozoa and stuff? I don't. But anyway, thank you for watching. If you like my videos, please comment, like and subscribe, and goodbye.